Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar for today, Delivering the Workplace of the Future. My name is Megan Hadley, and on behalf of Cundall, I'd like to say thank you for coming from around the world to attend our webinar today. And in a moment, I'll hand you across to Andrew Thompson, who will be leading us through the topic for today. But first, there are just a couple of housekeeping items that I need to get out of the way. So as we move through the content today, and you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share with the other attendees or members of the panel, you could put them into the comments section of your Zoom toolbar. And if there are any questions that you'd like our panelists to address, we do have a section for that at the end of the webinar. You can just send those to us via that toolbar as well in the Q&A button. If your question unfortunately doesn't get managed to answer at the end of today, then we will follow up with you via email later on this week. And the last thing that I need to let you know is that the Delivering the Workplace of the Future webinar is being recorded today. So if you do want to view the webinar after it has concluded, you can do that, and I'll be sending a link out to everybody who has registered for the event. And you can feel free to share that as well with other people that you think will be interested. So thank you for bearing with me through those little items. And now I'm going to pass you across to Andrew Thompson. Thank you.
Fantastic, Meg. Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome to everybody dialing in, as Meg said, from across the world, primarily the Asia Pacific region, but especially to anyone dialing in from the UK. We had a couple of people sign up, which is very dedicated given it's 2:30 in the morning. So if you have dialed in from there, I hope you're wrapped up warm, and we'll give you a great presentation to get your early start to the day off and running. As Meg mentioned, my name is Andrew Thompson. I'm a Sustainability Associate here with Cundall in Melbourne, and I'll be facilitating today's session. It's great to have you with us to talk about delivering the workplace of the future. We will have 5 speakers coming up, all experts in their field. They have a mere 7 minutes to regale you with all the trends that are happening in their respective disciplines in the industry. Now, before I get going and introduce them, I'll have a little session myself to get today's webinar going. Before that, I would like to just pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I'm dialing in from, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation here in Australia, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the country on which all of you are dialing in from today. Now, as is traditional, before we get going with our webinar today, I'll tell you a little bit about Cundall, who we are and what we do. We are a multidisciplinary engineering firm. We started in the UK, but we are now across the globe in 10, 11, 12, 13 countries, depending on how you count all the affiliate offices we have. We've delivered projects in over 50 countries globally and have nearly 1,000 staff. Speaking as a sustainability consultant, I'm particularly proud to always mention that we are the world's only One Planet Living endorsed consultancy. And as of last year, our entire global business is net zero carbon, and we were the first multidisciplinary engineering firm to achieve that, which is fantastic. As I mentioned, most of you dialing in today are from the Asia Pacific region, where we have offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and 5 offices across Australia. We also have offices in the Middle East, Europe, and the UK. In terms of the services we offer building services engineering, sustainable design, structural and civil engineering, and a whole suite of specialist services, including security consultancy, smart buildings, lighting design, acoustics, and we'll be talking about some of those topics and their role in the workplace later on today. Now, as I mentioned, there will be 5 speakers I will be introducing shortly, who will have their 7 minutes to regale you with the stories of their discipline and what are the hot topics in those areas. But before that, I'm going to use my position as a host to have a bit of a light-hearted kickoff. And I thought, before we look at the workplace of the future, let's try looking at the workplace of the past. Where have we come from? It's always important to look at what's gone before whenever we start to talk about where we believe the trends will go in the future. And I'm going to do that through the medium of famous workplaces from Hollywood and the land of TV. So first up, For any of you who are fans of the television series Mad Men, you might recognize this setting. This is the main office from the first couple of seasons of that show. Now, when office spaces first appeared at the very early part of the last century, they tend to be a bit ad hoc. We often took just large spaces, almost warehouse-style spaces, and put desks in them. We needed that because we needed high ceiling spaces to get the volume, because we didn't have mechanical ventilation and the heating and cooling we do now. And we also needed the big windows to get daylight in, because we didn't have the quality of electric lighting that we now have. Now, by the 60s, we had invented all of those, and boy, were we proud of them. So we got rid of the windows, the natural light, the openable windows. We brought the ceilings down, and we closed ourselves off from the world, as you can see in the images here. Another particularly interesting thing about this kind of workplace is that the open plan area, considered so valuable today, was more where the junior staff were put at the time. That was felt appropriate, and the executives walled themselves off in their corner offices. Now, that attitude might explain why, if we skip forward a decade or two into the 80s and 90s, we suddenly find ourselves all in our own little kind of a corner office, the dreaded and hated cubicle of the 80s and 90s office space. This image from The Matrix, you can see it probably represents what most of us think of when we think of cubicles: small, dark, dehumanizing. At this point, not only had we cut ourselves off from having an open window, we couldn't even see the window. Not only were we not close to daylight, we couldn't even see where it was coming from. And we boxed ourselves in, so we couldn't even see another person. If you compare that to today's office space, where we're trying to encourage interaction and collaboration, it was a completely different mentality. If we skip forward another decade or two, we can take a look at the very aptly named The Office TV show. And you can see at this stage in the 2000s, things were starting to change. The partitions had come down, it was opening up. The desks were starting to declutter. Our monitor screens had gone flat screen rather than cathode ray. The phones were starting to scale down and beginning to disappear as we moved on to the world of headsets. And things were starting to become a little closer to what we have today. Now, just before I jump off looking at workplaces and trying not to steal any of the thunder of my colleagues coming up, one little anecdote that I thought was interesting when I looked through all these images for today's presentation. I got one of the modern office, which is up next, and you can see we've now started to re-embrace the daylight, the proximity to windows. We've dematerialized, we've got rid of the ceiling tiles, we've stripped things back. It's very open plan. What was interesting was we were talking there about some of the differences in old workplaces. There's also some similarities, and the workplace which looks most similar, I felt, to today's, as you'll see on the next slide, is the workplace from the 1920s. Back then, we also had the higher ceiling spaces, although then it was because we needed the dilution of air. Now it's because we welcomed that space. We had those windows, the large windows at the side, because we needed the daylight. Now we don't need it, but we want it and we value it. And also we had those decluttered ceilings because, well, we simply didn't have the Hvac to put up there at the time. Unfortunately, that is where the analogy ends. I can't pretend we had great digital security, and we certainly can't call those smart buildings, but I think it's interesting just to see that in some ways we've maybe come full circle. Now, it's not just the modern office place itself which is changing. The kind of services that we as a consultant offer are also changing with it. Once upon a time, if you were being uncharitable, you might have said that the engineer in the workplace it's all about fan coils and lighting troughters. Boy, have things changed. So now we're offering services like productivity mapping, where we can take daylight modeling, we can take thermal comfort studies, we can take air quality data, either predicted or live, and overlay all these maps onto the workplace and work out where is the most productive place in the office to put your people. Because as we all know, the biggest cost in an office, it isn't rent, it isn't energy, it's people. So getting that extra 1% of productivity can make a really big difference. We also do air quality monitoring. Well, not just air quality, daylight, all sorts, but live data from the office space, monitoring VOCs, humidity, temperature, CO2. Fascinating to get that information from a live workplace, because it really tells you if things like your meeting areas are actually working the way they should. And of course, very important to be able to bring that up with your landlord if things aren't working as they should. Well, building standard is another feature we're seeing becoming very common in workplaces. China, I think, is the second biggest market for this outside America, Australia the third. Our London office was the first office in Europe to achieve WELL Gold, and this is now starting to become commonplace in high-spec workplaces because, as we mentioned a slide or two ago, it's all about people and productivity, and that's the biggest health and well-being impact. It's the biggest financial impact in a workplace. We also offer virtual acoustic reality. We're all used to the idea of virtual reality. You clip on your headset and you see the 3D images around you. You can now overlay that with sound, and you can actually test how a space will sound as you navigate your way through it. And that obviously can be very important for everything from an airport terminal down to seminar rooms and teaching spaces. And last but not least, parametric modeling. This is probably more to do with the base building design, but the base building design, of course, is critical to health and well-being inside the workplace. Are we getting daylight? Are we getting thermal comfort? Are we getting the right balance of daylight and passive heating, but also keeping energy efficiency? And parametric modeling allows us now to compare all of those variables, sometimes conflicting variables, in one assessment. Now, I have just hit my time. I'll pretend that was perfectly to design. I'll now hand you over to our 5 speakers for the day. So joining us shortly, we'll have Bettina Easton, Head of Light 4 at Candle in Australia, to take us through lighting design trends, followed by Patrick Carpenter, our Head of Acoustics in the Asia-Pac region, joining from our Melbourne office. He will be followed by Alex Saez, talking about the very important topic of air quality in workplaces. We all know after 2020, that's a key issue for everyone. Alex will be followed by Michelle Ganley, talking about smart buildings, and Hartmut Kraft from Singapore will be following up with a look at digital security in the workplace. So that will be all from me. I hope you really enjoyed today's presentation, and with that, I will hand you over to Bettina. Thank you all.
Thanks, Andrew. My name's Bettina, and I'm Head of Lighting in Australia, based out of the Sydney office. Firstly, I would like to go back through and touch a few things that Andrew didn't mention, the nature of the work and the technology that drives the change. In the 50s and 60s, our tasks were dominated by the almighty paper and pen. Our spaces got larger and our working hours got longer, so electric lighting was now a very important element. It's worth mentioning that the tubular fluorescent was being mass produced now, and we see the introduction of the trophon luminaire that provides bright light across the floor. In the 70s, we see the first workstations, and they divided up the workers in the hope of increasing productivity. The electric typewriter took over from the manual ones, and the quality of ink and paper was getting better and better. It was at this time that the research into the amount of light we needed to perform certain tasks was developed and led to our first lighting guidelines and standards. For those of you who love numbers, this is where we started hearing 500 lux on the horizontal work surface, and later in Australia, reduced down to 320 maintained. In the 80s and 90s and part of the 90s, we had that dreaded cubicle, which Andrew showed you earlier. We saw an uptake of PCs moving the tasks from screens, but let's face it, the pen and paper was still dominant. Shadows and reflections from lighting was now a big issue, and glare metrics were introduced. This was also the decades of lamp and luminaire development. So the compact fluorescent was made small and curly and went into downlights. We had a development of tubular fluorescence called the T5, which now had better color and was more efficient. The metal halide lamps, which I loved because of their great color quality and quality of light, were getting smaller and put into really cool downlights. But most of you will remember the smallest light source of them all, the halogen. This was the only one we could dim and control. By the 2010s, we finally realized that cubicles were not the answer. So we went back to open plan, and now we were dominated by screens. So our work has gone from the horizontal to vertical, completely different. Electronic ballasts and developed in lighting control also now allowed us to dim the fluorescent tubes. Yay, we had some control. This gave the rise in lighting automation systems. Also, we had the LED revolution. Today, any new fit out, all the other light sources have now disappeared. So what do we expect in the future? Well, there is research right now into laser technology. Maybe that will replace the LEDs in a couple of years. So looking back, our work has changed dramatically from looking down using paper to screens looking straight ahead. The office layout has gone full circle, but what's remained the same? It's the lighting. 90% of offices today still have a uniform grid of luminaires, and lighting standards have not moved on from the research results of the 70s when we used pen and paper on a horizontal surface. The other 10%, the lovely one Andrew showed earlier, has only come in the last couple of years with a trend to remove the ceiling and expose the surfaces. This creates great, interesting spaces and lighting, but only for a lucky few. I'm going to use one of our projects, First Sentier at Barangaroo in Sydney, as an example. It achieved 6-star Green Star, WELL Gold, and won an IES Award of Excellence for Lighting Design. It was completed in late 2019, and it broke a few rules moving into an efficient base build space. So the next slide, you can see the two different office spaces in the same building. The office on the left uses the base build luminaires and shows the high uniform light across the floor. There is no contrast, no depth, and no excitement in the interior. The First Sentier on the right, the lights are controlled by photosensors which dim and turn on and off the lights depending on the amount of daylight. The contrast of the brightness levels through the space creates hierarchy and interest. In the booth, you can see the uplighting provides soft, warm light to the faces and gives you a feeling of intimacy, warmth, and calmness, even though we're in the middle of the open plan space. Both spaces provide similar brightness levels to the desks and tables. The left concentrates on the horizontal even light, the right on the vertical light with contrast. Which one is more inviting? So next we will see the open spaces of both offices. The left still using the efficient base build luminaires. It looks the same as the other area. It has uniform light of 320 lux across the whole floor. It's bright, but it feels dull. Workers need to be stimulated. On the right side, we can see the light is only placed where it's needed. There is no lighting in the circulation areas, so it lowers the overall brightness level, but it still gives the same amount of light on the desk and uniformity as the one on the left. Equal. We crave stimulation, and this is how, and it has to come from our interior or a connection to a view. Not everyone can be lucky enough to face the windows, so we need to add visual interest to the interiors. We placed wall lights, joinery lighting, and deliberate accent lighting to the ceilings and walls, so every worker had a view. It's worth mentioning here that the lighting budget given to us was calculated for the front of house areas only, and that was expected to remain with the base build that you see on the left. We presented the design which focused on the workers' needs and not the standards, and with careful luminaire selection, we provided a better solution and well in budget. The design was also very efficient, producing only 3 watts a square meter, 3 times more efficient than the base build lighting system. Maybe the future should be to provide a base build more like a cold shell with only emergency lighting installed. The tenant can then have a lighting design to meet their needs and make them feel happy and healthy. So looking at the two spaces, the only difference is the lighting design. First Sentier is a financial company that operates over 24 hours, and it's important that the interiors were inviting during the day and night. So as we adjust to the darkness outside, the light levels need to dim to relax the eye. This here we automated, but the workers also had control via an app on their phone, pad, or also by switches. The reception and connection stair in the core was deliberately less bright, so it was lit more like a hotel reception than an office space. We changed the color temperature to warm, so it accentuated the materials, and we integrated the lighting, minimizing anything overhead. The area on the right, which is the executive area, it sets the mood for the visitors as they arrive. We highlighted the central joinery and the plants from above and relied only on spill light for the circulation areas. As you walk through the space, you can see the light on the surfaces, but you don't see the luminaires. It allows you to focus on the warmth and depth of the interior finishes. The last area I would like to talk about is the alternative work and relaxing spaces hidden on the northern side of the building. These lucky workers can at any time choose to move from their desks to any breakout space, including this one you see on the left. The lighting relies on reflected light to project great vertical illumination without horrible overhead lighting that causes ugly shadows. It feels cozy and welcoming, but has the same brightness as your office space in the open office. The contrast in color and reflected light changes the mood completely, and it appears more like a cafe. The small space on the right, I was quite skeptical that many people would actually use it. It has a great connection with subtle daylight, meaning that it never receives direct sun. We designed small recessed linear into the existing wall, which provided great functional light without shadowing, and it really anchors the space. I'm so glad that when I went back either day or night, there was someone reading a book or relaxing or working in the space. So I'm going to leave you with this thought and a small challenge. The client coined this overall design as resi-mmercial, an office that felt more like a combination of home and office. And isn't that what we want for our future? A space that makes you feel good? And now, please spend some time walking through your business district and look up. Let's change the 90% of engineered lighting grids devoid of life to a lighting design space we all deserve and want to work in. Thank you, and I'd like to introduce Patrick to speak about his amazing acoustic design. Take it away, Pat.
Thanks, Bettina. So I'm Patrick Carpenter, and I lead Cundall's Asia Pacific Acoustics Group based in our Melbourne office. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our work at First Sentier because we also provided acoustic design advice, and the fit-out presented a few acoustic challenges which are worth mentioning. The next couple of slides will show some of the ways we approach them in order to achieve the level of design required for the WELL and Green Star standards. So the stair that Bettina was mentioning before was created because the client wanted a connection between the two floors of their office. So by locating this stair adjacent to enclosed meeting rooms and less sensitive spaces, the architect was able to minimize the impact of noise transfer between the floors. Now, this is an example of how good space planning for acoustics is an effective method of noise control, and when considered early in the project can significantly reduce the cost and achieve a good acoustic outcome. Now, as the First Sentier was targeting a WELL rating, the meeting rooms and offices have very high speech privacy requirements. Normally, an acoustic consultant would aim to have partitions run full height slab to slab, but since the ceiling void of this building on each floor was needed to be left open so that air could circulate, it wasn't possible here. So if you look at the little highlight I've put in the top corner of the image, it's a nice little shadow gap. Now, that architectural feature also conceals how we design the meeting rooms as enclosed pods, a fully enclosed box with a solid acoustic ceiling to stop noise traveling over the top of the walls. To achieve this, the ceilings needed to be more solid than we would normally see, and all of the lighting and services penetrations had to be selected or acoustically treated so as not to allow noise to break into or out of the space. Now, another thing to notice on this picture is the large amount of timber paneling on those two walls. It's acoustic absorption, and it's there to stop people's voices bouncing back and forth across the room, making conversation difficult to follow. This treatment is particularly important when using the space for video conferencing. Because if the last year has taught us anything about office design, it's that the ability to video conference flexibly and communicate clearly is critical to the operation of all our businesses. We've all had to struggle to follow conversations with people who are speaking from a meeting room where video conferencing has not been part of the design brief. If you compare the space on the left with the room on the previous slide, you can see all the exposed plasterboard and the glass, which can result in the sorts of issues we're trying to avoid. Existing spaces like this can be made to work effectively and affordably, provided that attention is paid to the room's acoustic design. Attention should also be paid to the AV equipment, such as microphones and speakers, since what works in one space may not be ideal for another. The other mode of video conferencing we've all had to become used to these days are the daily one-on-one calls and Zoom meetings we have at our desks. So how are we going to use our workstations as more of us embrace remote working and remote collaboration? There isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for this, and it will vary greatly from business to business. Discussing the future of our clients' workspaces, some plan to continue on using their existing layouts, socially distanced if necessary. Some will coordinate home working with hot desking, and others plan to downsize using their offices only for meetings and workshops. Product suppliers will come up with solutions like the one on the right, and the cubicle might even make a comeback. It will depend on what works best for your office, and consideration of acoustics at the start of any new fit out will dramatically improve outcomes. But how are we applying this ourselves? In Melbourne, we're in the process of relocating our offices to larger premises in order to accommodate our growing teams. And an example of how we are approaching the challenges of the future is to move to an office space that allows flexibility in how we collaborate. Without radically changing the amount of available space or the furniture we already have, but by paying attention to how we work, space planning and finishes, we are planning on creating a workspace which is effective at providing personal workstations for our teams, as well as for hot desking, team working, collaborative design meetings, or more informal meetings with clients and colleagues. But in the end, acoustics and good acoustic outcomes come down to achieving a balance, which results in the best outcomes given the constraints placed upon the project. We look for opportunities that each project and building provides. While there's usually a minimum standard for acoustics, say sound insulation requirements for residential buildings, which are common in building codes, the potential to improve beyond this and achieve better outcomes will depend on how we approach the many pressures placed on the project. Good acoustics doesn't mean absolute quiet and walls everywhere. Background noise levels should not be so high as to be intrusive, but not so low as to reduce privacy. Good space planning can result in more open floors, which bring with it the other benefits of good lighting and positive airflow. And acoustic design consultants need to interact with all the other disciplines and consider the needs of each. So on that note, I'll hand over to Alex Saez, who's going to discuss Cundall's approach to the future of HVAC design.
Thanks, Patrick. My name is Alex Saez, and I'm Cundall Operations Director for the Asia Pacific region, based in our Singapore office. Today, I'm going to talk about what can the HVAC design do to help finding a way to go back to business in a safely manner. So I will leave you all with a thought for a minute. Should be looking into deploying new type of certifications, such as zero virus certification or pandemic-proof tested certification. An HVAC design that would be meeting these new certifications criteria will make that the office spaces could be categorized as premium, so the landlords could ask for higher rents because these offices could be warranted in a safe environment, or actually achieving these certifications could be the only way for some companies to go back to business. So what can we do from an HVAC and air ventilation design perspective for achieving the objective of a safe environment? I will list now just a few options. First one is higher air changes per hour. Ventilation is needed in office buildings to remove stale, used air and replace it with fresh outdoor air. A well-ventilated indoor environment will help reduce the risk of infection by airborne virus transmission. There is a study published in 2019 that found that providing even minimum levels of outdoor air ventilation reduce influenza transmission as much as having between 50–60% of the people in a building vaccinated. Another option would be enhancing the filter's performance using HEPA or near HEPA filters that can help to remove virus particles, as often virus travels as part of larger particles. So portable and fixed room air cleaners using HEPA filters and recirculating fans can be deployed with an occupied space to remove an inactive virus particles and other pollutants in the air. Another option would be ultraviolet germicidal irradiation, UVGI. It's a disinfection method that employs short wavelength ultraviolet light to kill or inactive microorganisms. A recent research has suggested that a small band of far UV light can damage viruses, but is still safe for humans. UV lights can be installed within air-handed units and fan-cooled units to disinfect the airstream and prevent the buildup of biofilms on wet surfaces, like the cooling coils. Another option is sensors and controls. Install CO2 sensors to warn against underventilation, especially in spaces that are often used for 1 hour or more by groups of people. It is important, obviously, the sensor location away from outdoor air sources and within the occupied zone. And last but not least, humidification. There is a quote from Dr. Stephanie Taylor from Harvard Medical School that says, "Transmission is great in dry air, infectivity is higher in dry air, and the ability of human being to fight infection is impaired." Low levels of humidity can affect virus transmission in 3 ways. There is a reduced effectiveness of the mucous membrane defense system to fight off respiratory infections. The virus survives better in low humidity environments, and there are impacts on the droplet evaporation rate, increasing the production of aerosol particles. So therefore, it's recommendable that relative humidity levels should be kept above 40%. So as designers, we could investigate all these actions. There is a significant question mark that needs to be addressed. What could be the implications? What would be the extra cost? And what is the feasibility of implementing all these actions in the designs without affecting the energy efficiency and the sustainability goals? So in the next slide, we are going to talk about some of the challenges that the design will need to deal with. Additional noise problems derived from pumping more air into the space. Needless to mention that attenuators will be installed, but that will bring additional electrical power consumption. Another challenge is the thermal comfort, on the basis that higher ventilation could lead to drafty environment if the HVAC design is not properly designed. There would also be an increase in the electrical consumption. We are talking here about big electrical consumers, such as the humidifiers or the attenuators just mentioned, that will impact on the specific fan power of air handed units and fan coil units. In addition, the higher the efficiency of an air filtration system, the higher the pressure drop. So last but not least, there would be a reduced number of options for energy exchange if we want to avoid mixing and recirculation of air. So as I mentioned earlier, the question is how to implement all this HVAC solution in a sustainable and energy efficient way, as well as maintaining the green goals. So the word that's come to my mind are innovation and smart. So the consultants, we need to find innovative and non-traditional ways to design offices in order not to take any single step back towards the efficiency and sustainability way of doing things. So let's talk now about a series of HVAC design options that could be considered. Designs should avoid central air recirculation ventilation plants to eliminate cross-contamination risks. Where it cannot be avoided, we should be looking into the use of HEPA filters in the return air or install disinfection devices, such as the previously mentioned UVGIs. Also, the design shall consider the provision of air-handed units for every single floor and or every tenant within the floor plate. Always considering that there should be adequate separation of air-handed units intake and discharge locations to avoid unintended recirculation of air. It also must be noted that localized recirculation of air within an occupied space to maintain thermal comfort condition is acceptable, provided that the appropriate level of outdoor air is supplied to the space. Depending upon criticality of the business operations at a certain floor, the HVAC design can also help to warranty the business continuity. With dual systems, we could provide redundancy and resiliency in case one of the air-handed units is compromised if virus is detected in the return or exhaust duct. And just to mention that this is not only about design, but also about an adequate maintenance of the HVAC system. Facilities management professionals should be provided with training and educational resources as health and well-being. It is of the utmost importance to adopt safe working practices using appropriate PPEs when inspecting or replacing filters, especially extract air filters. Another HVAC system arrangement that could be looked into in collaboration with the interior designers and architects, especially for large floor plates or for different tenants or different teams within the same organization located in the same floor, would be the segregation with partitions of different rooms or for different teams working areas instead of locating them in an open plan, and designing the HVAC at negative pressure within those areas to protect other users for spread of the virus. This solution would be something similar to a hospital design, providing clean and dirty corridors. In the next slide, and as I anticipated earlier, linking the HVAC design with the smart offices concept would be a very strong way to run the spaces efficiently from an energy point of view. Just one example of this could be that through the smart office application, the users could pre-book rooms or areas in advance going to the office, selecting the temperature, daylight exposure they want, the time they will spend in that area, with whom they are going to meet, or even how are they going to dress up for the meeting. The latter seems to be an option nowadays, as it looks like the dress code is a bit more relaxed after COVID, with people meeting literally anywhere they can or allowed to meet. So perhaps there is also an opportunity to reconsider the comfort internal conditions. So So selecting all these parameters in advance will provide inputs to the Office Smart System to automatically redirect people to preconditioned warmer or colder areas within the floor plates, saving a lot of energy. The Hvac system will run automatically and will precondition only the areas that will be used during the day at the parameters predefined, ensuring that the users are directed to those areas that will satisfy their own comfort parameters and needs for the day. But much better than me, I will hand over now the presentation and the talk about smart offices to my colleague, Michelle. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm in the building automation team based in Melbourne, and I focus on smart building design and also on BMS and PLC control systems design. So as we're developing more sophisticated control systems for monitoring and controlling air quality and space utilization, we're also developing more sophisticated smart building platforms to ensure that all of the separate systems and sensors in a building can interact with each other in the smartest way possible. So what makes a building smart? A smart building will integrate the data produced from each sensor and each system within the building, and then provide applications focused on improving the tenant's experience, and also provide fault detection and diagnostics to improve the building's operation. So one side of smart building design focuses on extending the life cycle, performance, and understanding of assets within the building. We're finding that a lot of tenants, facility managers, and building owners are wanting more and more visibility into their building's performance, such as their energy consumption, tracking against neighbours and other targets, their air quality, their space utilisation, and their occupancy levels. So from the design stage of a building, we can design a tagging philosophy and a communication protocol for each separate system, so that they will easily integrate with a smart building platform. Or on the other hand, we can also review existing systems within a building to see how we can get the best and most out of the sensors and the devices that are already there. The other side of smart building design focuses on improving the tenant and the user's experience. So to understand opportunities for designing smart features which can benefit the user within the building, we first try to understand a day in the life of a tenant within the building, so understand their needs and then understand how we can use data to facilitate their experience. To do that, we focus on a user-centric design where we engage with the client to understand how the building will flow, and then we try to apply technology to make the experience better. Coming out of coronavirus, developing a smart building experience which can adapt to things like flexible working arrangements and desk booking and touchless access throughout the building have been pretty important focuses of some of our recent designs. So one of our recent projects, Kundal recently worked with a major beverage company to produce an occupier-centric design, which has facilitated what was an office of 1,200 staff with allocated desks and an abundance of car parking just outside London. And they moved to an office which is now 500 desks in central London with very limited car parking. So to do this, we designed a smart building platform that removed the pain points in the building, so booking desks and rooms and services, colleague builder entry, and also visitor management. We worked really closely with the client through the design and tender stage to select the smart building platform and the master systems integrated that was the most suited to this project. The company up here also includes a number of features for the tenant's experience, like booking the gym, ordering from the cafe, and status notifications from the user's selected train lines. The project also included setting up a digital twin for the building to provide easy access to the data from each system and sensor within the building. So when we set up a digital twin of the building, we design a 3D model of the building with sensors, devices, and systems all shown in their installed locations, alongside all their data and archiving history. So setting up a valuable digital twin of the building enables the single pane of glass view of the building's data with all the customizable dashboards for tracking and for monitoring. The single view of the building's data also enables the use of data-driven maintenance and analytics systems, which can give the facility maintenance team access to all the predictive algorithms which predict future repairs and replacements of assets, and enables them to schedule replacements of the same type of assets together. There's currently a market push to specify open protocol systems throughout a building to reduce the reliance on single source vendors for maintenance. However, one of the big problems that comes with designing everything as open as possible is all the cybersecurity requirements that come with this. So it's always really important to look at these two things together when we're selecting devices and protocols. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Hartmut to talk to you more about security.
Thank you, Michelle. My name is Hartmut. I'm leading the security consultancy for Asia Pacific. I'm based out of the Singapore office, and I would like to start out with what we have learned from the pandemic. Now, this is your lobby, your calling card, the first impression that your visitors, your clients, your business partners will have. And of course, you don't want to spoil that. Now, unfortunately, along comes COVID and brings us the need for temperature checks when we're entering buildings. And unfortunately, in the future, this is not going to be optional. So it's better to plan ahead. And how could that look? I don't think that this is actually going to work. It might work for airports, but it's not going to work for your office. So what you would have to do is you would have to have security and design work together to deploy thermal cameras efficiently and, most importantly, unobtrusively, so that you can actually keep your calling card untainted. Next topic is system integration, and we've heard about that before from Michelle, from Bettina, from Alex. It's a big topic. Now, this is here. This shows a number of possible systems that all sit on the security systems platform within a building. With the security system, it's normal that these are actually integrated. So that begs the question, why do we stop here if the synergies are actually making a case for integration? When we do integrate the systems into the building management systems, this will lead to this situation. As you can see, now the entire security platform is integrated into the building management system along with a number of other systems. And the synergy effects of that can be, for example, energy efficiency. You can turn off the lights when there is nobody around. You can predict movements of people to adjust the HVAC, and security systems usually know where people are, cameras, access control, etc. So that could help with that. Another thing, of course, is big data analytics, which is where security devices collect data, for example, to improve building efficiency. Imagine you have a camera, and in the view of the camera, there is a pipe, and the pipe starts dripping. So there is an alarm created, the team is dispatched, and they can probably repair this before a bigger issue happens. Or you can predict situations. For example, cameras pick up that a certain area of the building, people are getting together. So the need for more air conditioning would be there. Now, instead of blasting this area when people have already congregated, the system could slowly and efficiently, energy efficiently, raise it, and as soon as people disperse again, can lower this effort again. Now, this is what we would call a human-centric security, actually a smart integrated security system. And that makes a facility smarter and a lot friendlier to the inhabitants. And it's probably also the difference between an integrated system and a smartly integrated system. And this smart integration can be achieved with the help of communication protocols and forums. And for example, BACnet comes to mind. That's the Building Automation and Controls Network. But also the ONVIF, the Open Network Video Interface Forum, or the PSIA, which is the Physical Security Interoperability Alliance. And all of these communication protocols and forums greatly increase the potential for integration of the systems into the building. The third topic is security in the cloud. Not for the cloud, but in the cloud. And when we think about security, we need to take a long list of items into consideration like we see here. And these are just a few examples because the list goes on. Now, when you think about using a cloud, would you rather go with a cloud provider? Or would you rather keep it all in-house? Or maybe you would be thinking about a hybrid solution. Let's take a look at the status quo. The status quo is something that I would call enterprise IT or legacy IT. As we can see, all the elements here involved are customer managed, meaning it's all up to you. And as I said, this is the status quo. Now there are other options available, like what is called infrastructure as a service, where you, as the customer, still have elements to manage, but the infrastructure is actually managed by a cloud provider. Another possibility is what is called platform as a service, where the customer only manages the applications and the entire platform is managed by the cloud provider. And eventually, there is software as a service. Here, the customer hands over the management of all elements to the cloud provider. And when we look at the options, we can see that this type of service is highly customizable, and whatever fits your company's needs can certainly be provided by the cloud providers. And with that, I'm at the end of my presentation, and I would like to hand over to Andrew for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hartmut, and thank you to all of our speakers. That was some fantastic insight to some of the topical areas of workplace design. I always think it's one of the hardest things you can be asked to do, to try and condense everything you know about your area of expertise into a 7-minute slot. So that was fantastically insightful. Thank you all for doing that for us this afternoon. Some great points that were touched on in there. I won't try to summarize Bettina's except to pick up on that great rallying call at the end. Let's look at the ceiling. What is up there? Is that lighting there for us, or is it just to meet a standard? Patrick touched on one of the real issues from 2020, the issue of acoustic privacy when it comes to video conferencing. I don't know, Patrick, if our skill set has got so great that we can deal with toddlers charging in and out of our home offices. That's maybe beyond even Candle's skills. Alex got into the issues of air quality there, and the interesting fact that low humidity can actually be bad for viral transmission. I think we often associate high humidity with health concerns. And for me, one of the challenging issues of how do we balance health and well-being with energy efficiency. Michelle got into the vexed issue of smart buildings and some of the amazing things going on there. And can we get our coffee ordered for us? Can we have automated maintenance? Can the building start looking after itself for us? And Hartmut, with some of that great imagery there of the thermal imaging cameras in the lobby, I dread to think what it would make of me turning up having just cycled into the office and walking in the front door. But the very real issue of security and data security in the digital age. So we have done the rarest of things with one of these webinars and actually finished exactly on time, which is fantastic and testament to the discipline of our speakers. It does mean we have a bit of time to address some of the questions that have come in. So Alex, you have been popular. So I'll maybe start with the first question for you on, I'm not sure if everybody can see it up there, but the question is on pandemic-proof HVAC certification. Can you please elaborate more on this? Is there an organization that does these kinds of certifications, and what is the process? Alex, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. We don't really know if there is an organization looking into these official certifications yet. I just wanted to leave everybody with that thought, because probably that would be very useful for the reasons mentioned. What Candle have done in this regards is we have been involved in real project assessment of how to go back to business, or what do they need to change in their HVAC system to go back to business or to operate the building in a safely manner. For example, we have been working in the Northern Territory Correctional Facility in Australia, doing a full technical due diligence of their systems, especially focused in the air handling units, the type of filtration, risk of cross-contamination, how to rebalance the installation if we are providing negative pressure in some of the areas to avoid the spread of virus. And then here in Singapore, we have been part of technical due diligence for some of the hospitals in the city to analyze exactly the same, what they need to do to provide a safer environment. Thank you.
Fantastic, Alex. Thank you. There is another question on here from Ronald asking, will HEPA filters create a hazardous waste handling issue? And also a second part about, do you believe far UVC disinfection is now commercially viable?
Okay, yeah, I see another question about UV lighting. I mentioned during the presentation some research that are suggesting that a small band of far UV lights on the wavelengths of roughly 220 nanometers can damage the viruses, but still safe for humans. So this research is, the name of the research is The Potential of Far UV Light for the Next Pandemic. It was published in the Physics World magazine, 19th of May, 2020. I know that the industry is looking in how to make this commercially viable, but the theory is that in those wavelengths won't affect human. But we need to be very aware that the UV lights needs to be used with caution, especially prolonged exposure to these lengths can produce rapid sunburn and skin cancer, as well as they can produce ozone. So that's why there is a big push in the industry to find products that can be applied for the human use.
I would just like to add to that for general lighting. UV lighting has been inside laboratories for quite some time, and it's really the way you use the UV light to protect humans from it. At the moment, the research is so in its infancy for general light sources. So I would recommend no UV light in a general light source that is above your head or anywhere near it. It's really should be used very close to the surface and not shone on the human skin at all. Thanks.
Thank you, Bettina. Fascinating hearing that. Being Irish, I have a bit of a problem with exposure to UV light in normal circumstances, never mind an office building. So it will be interesting to see how that develops over time in terms of the health concerns, both positive and negative. I should point out, I actually have to make a slight correction / retraction. At the start of this presentation, I noted that China is the #2 market for well ratings in the world. We are lucky to be joined by Jack Noonan this afternoon, who is the well representative in Australia, and he has just pointed out that actually China is now the world's #1 market for well ratings. So nice to have a first here in Asia Pacific. There is also a question that has come through in the chat box from Michelle Yuang. Could you elaborate on sustainability and wellness for the workplace? What's the outlook for the next few years, and what can we do or implement when designing a workplace? Now, we are joined by another one of my colleagues, Loretta Brazucas from the Melbourne office, who, this is her area of specialty. We unfortunately couldn't fit in her 7-minute slot this afternoon, but maybe Loretta, if you can come off mute, would you maybe like to see if we can answer Michelle's question?
Apologies, Andy. I don't think we have Loretta with us today. Would you be able to respond to that one?
Absolutely,
Otherwise, we can
yes.
follow up with Michelle after this.
Yeah, one thing I did want to mention, actually sort of crossing the issues of some of the pandemic responses we've been talking about and health and well-being, is that there is a well health safety checklist, which is, I guess to put it crudely, is an abbreviated version of the full well building standard, but focused on all those aspects that could be of relevance when facing potential future pandemics. So air quality and surface disinfection, antimicrobial surfaces, UV protection, as we've mentioned there. So that is one particular element of health and well-being that is tied to what we saw last year, and I think will become more relevant over time. Other than that, the main thing I can say about sustainability and wellness at the workplace is it is growing exponentially. We're now seeing it's well beyond any given rating tool or any given type of environment. It's becoming quite prominent here in Australia. As we mentioned, it's now #1 in, or China's the #1 market for it. So as has been touched on in Alex's presentation, there are issues we need to address about counterbalancing health and well-being with efficiency. But as Bettina was mentioning there with the lighting, good quality design doesn't have to mean any more energy. So hopefully that in a very brief way answers some of that, answers that question. Hartmut, we had a question come up there relating to cloud services, and is there a conflict with non-disclosure agreements when it comes to handling clients' data? I don't know if you'd like to jump in on that one.
Yes, thank you. Of course, we always have to be very careful about that. Now, as I have shown, these cloud services, it's a question, do I keep it in-house? Do I outsource it? Do I have a hybrid? Whatever I choose, I first of all have to make sure it actually fits my company's needs, and of course, by extension, my clients' needs. Now, if there is any conflict with NDAs, that are impacting on this, then of course the right approach has to be chosen. There is no one right answer to this. It is really what is right for your business, for your enterprise, and how can this be worked out. That of course will involve, well, security, of course, will involve IT, will involve legal, will involve, of course, the provider, if you choose to go with a provider, etc. So there are a number of things that need to be worked out before you can actually do this. But history has shown, I have actually worked with a few companies that have gone that way, and it is possible. It's just probably not as straightforward as everybody would hope.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hartmut. And we are rapidly running out of time. I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in for Michelle. So a question has been asked here regarding the digital twin for use in a regular commercial building. Could you provide a feel for the business case for this in terms of upfront investment costs versus annual operational savings? I guess in its broadest sense, it's not necessarily just energy, but all manner of savings. Michelle, I don't know if you want to jump in and grab that one.
Yeah, so there's a really big business case. So setting up a digital twin will also allow you to get the most out of a lot of the analytics systems. So it will really reduce your sort of planned preventative maintenance and increase the potential for analytic systems to do a lot of this using data. But then not only does it do that, it will also future-proof your building for the more advanced AI software that's on the market. So it will really get it ready for those trends as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. And we still have 1 minute on the clock, so I'm going to go to a great question we've had posted here by Robin Fernandez. This is not necessarily tied to any one person's area of expertise, but the question is, what is the biggest challenge experienced in getting office workers back? So I'll invite anyone in the panel who wants to jump in on that one. I would just note that here in Melbourne, we've had this week, the Property Council of Australia is lobbying employers to allow people to, well, first of all, the government to give us free transport on a Friday morning, and then lobbying employers to let us knock off at 4 o'clock in the afternoon so we can go out and have a drink or have a meal and try to revitalize the city. So I'm sure that would help. I don't know if any of the panelists have any other thoughts on what might help get us back into these workplaces. I'm going to take that resounding silence as no, we all love our workplace, seeing as we design them, and we're already back and enjoying them. So I will just say, though, that certainly the idea of being allowed to knock off at 4 o'clock on a Friday would definitely tempt me back in. But look, I think a lot of what Alex was talking about there is very relevant. Do we need certifications? Do we need endorsements of these spaces to assure us in terms of the health benefits? I think there's also a general issue. I know I've seen in a couple of press articles recently about flexibility of workspaces, and can employers step up and offer that flexibility to reassure people that if they do come back to the office now, it won't be a case of going from working entirely at home during lockdown to working entirely back in the office, but we can find some sort of hybrid model of working. So hopefully that will entice us back. With that, we are now 1 minute overtime. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us from whichever part of the globe you have dialed in from. It was fantastic to be able to share this presentation with you this afternoon. Hopefully we have dealt with a lot of hot button issues, and we got to deal with almost all of your questions at the end. Apologies to those we missed out on. Also, thank you to all of our presenters this afternoon. As I say, always difficult to get everything into 7 minutes, but you did fantastically well. I'm sure we could have kept going for a lot longer. So thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we will be in touch with all of you soon.